Hello, everyone. It's Phil again. It's another special episode of Capes and Lunatics. I am here with Mr. Danny Fingeroth, and it seems like I keep speaking to these legendary Marvel writers, editors. Sir, thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Uh, I've, the main thing I guess we're here to talk about is you have a new book, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, A Marvelous Life.
Yeah, in fact, just to nitpick you right from the beginning,
Yes.
it's actually A Marvelous Life, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. Although I can see it's a little ambiguous on the cover, but technically,
Yeah.
it's called A Marvelous Life. Anyway, sorry to.
Oh no, it's your book. Tell me how it's been. The cover, and it's so you knew Stan personally, correct?
I did. I worked with him and knew him for over 40 years.
So was he as magical as he seemed to all of us in the general public?
Yeah, he was very charismatic and very witty and very caring. He wasn't perfect, but he was pretty damn good, and he was just quieter in real life than he was when you see him at a convention. The volume was a little turned down, but the same guy basically.
But he had this passion for the medium, and especially all these just the amount of characters he came up with.
Yeah, well, everybody knows that, of course, that he co-created with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko the iconic Marvel characters that are so unbelievably popular today. But he was a comic book professional writer and editor for 20 years before Fantastic Four #1.
Yeah, I read the book. I was reading the early years in the book, and it just seems like even when he basically came from nothing, but it's like he was always a go-getter. He always had this drive.
He really did. It's kind of a classic kind of rags to riches kind of greatest generation story. He was born during the Great. Well, he grew up in the Great Depression. He was born technically before the Depression, but his family was poor. They didn't need the Depression to be poor.
Yes.
The Depression just made it worse. But he went. He was lived in New York and Washington Heights and in the Bronx, which is across the river from New York, and in very impoverished circumstances. Went to local public schools, and his family always had issues over money and how they're going to pay the rent and so on. And so he had after he graduated high school, he very briefly went to college because the girl he liked was going to City College. But when they broke up, he dropped out, and then he went to work. I said he had a number of kind of almost menial jobs, sort of as he had a job as a job as an usher in a movie theater, and where he met Eleanor Roosevelt, and he had a job. And I think he tripped while he was showing her her seat, and she had to help him up. And and then he had jobs delivering sandwiches for a luncheonette, and all sorts of not very. He had some interesting jobs doing some freelance writing, writing obituaries, which he found very depressing and stuff like that, because he was writing obituaries for people who were still alive. As they do for celebrities. That's why there's always, the day after a celebrity dies, there's always a big obituary for them, because somebody wrote it in advance, unless they were very young, in which case probably. Anyway, so Stan had a distant cousin who owned this publishing company, who they got him a job assisting Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, and but there was no reason to think that job would last any longer than the half dozen other jobs he's had since high school. But obviously, it worked out. It worked out for him.
Yes. Oh yeah. But yeah, it just, maybe it's a lifelong comic fan of me, but it just seems like Stan and even his wife Joan, they were like the American royalty almost.
In a way,
To a lot of us.
Stan was, Stan was in a unique position at Marvel in that he was writer, editor, art director, and so um, he could make decisions in a way that editors at other companies couldn't, and it gave him the ability to really kind of improvise and to kind of work with artists in a certain way that brought out uh, the 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 abilities and the insights of all of them. I mean that
Mhm.
the downside of that was that it led in later years to conflicts over who did what and who got paid how much, which are definitely serious issues. But in terms of making the best possible comic books that they could, and really hitting a nerve with the reading public, he was able to do stuff that other people couldn't, and then he was enough of an extrovert and understood kind of branding enough to make I mean, and to make himself the face not just of Marvel and its characters, but of comics in general, and really because there was no one else who was um, willing and able to do that job. He sort of invented that larger role for himself, and so I guess I don't, you could look at them as a certain kind of comic book royalty. Stan and Joan, they enjoyed it. They enjoyed that being famous in that way, and I think they enjoyed the cameos. And yeah, he was. A lot of people who go into comics or any creative field tend to be introverts, and even if they're talented and brilliant, they may not be that good at, or certainly may not enjoy promoting themselves and promoting their coworkers and co-creators. But Stan really was the right kind of person at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I just call him royalty because I mean, I'm sure the movie cameos help now, but it's just if you ask someone in the general public, someone who's never even picked up a comic book, hey, name me a comic book creator, someone, everyone's going to say Stan Lee.
Yeah, that would be the only one that people would really know. I mean, it's funny because people, because I sometimes am asked, or just we'll be talking with somebody about who's the successor, who's the next one, and really there's not any clear person who's interested in or able to do that. The closest one I can think of is Todd McFarlane, who's
Mhm.
very outgoing and very talented, and likes and he likes interacting with people. But I even that's the only one I think who comes close to maybe what Stan's role was.
What do you think? Maybe that's just is that because like he's the most probably well-rounded, like Stan was, like he's basically running his own business, plus he's working on the creative side because
Right, exactly. Although, of course, the ironic thing about Stan was he did not own those Marvel
no.
characters. He was a very well paid employee, but he was always an employee of Marvel. Or he did start his own companies.
Mhm.
The ill-fated Stanley Media, and then more recently Pow Entertainment. But he's always going to be most associated with Marvel and the comics. Yeah, but I think Todd is sort of a next generation version of what Stan did, and what Todd and the other Image guys did was, of course, they learned the lessons that Stan's generation learned. Especially guys like Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and the people from the very first era of comics. A lot of them, were kind of they made good money or decent money while they were popular and while they were in demand, and but there was no real future for them. They were
Mhm.
kind of seen as interchangeable uh, freelancers, and even Stan had that problem sometimes, although obviously, more often he didn't. But I think people like the Image guys, Todd and Eric and the rest of them, saw saw that even happened. What even happened with the people in the generation right before them, the people doing comics in the 70s and 80s, who even if they were very popular, still were not guaranteed any kind of pension or any kind of future. They still had to be hustling for work even as they got older. So I think Todd realized that owning the properties and owning the company was a much better way to go. But I think as much as that, I think he's also got the personality to enjoy talking to crowds of people and is exciting. Like Stan, he's charismatic and exciting to listen to, and always has witty, insightful, and exciting things to say.
And do you think maybe they're both they were both game changers because back when Stan created Spider-Man and and the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Avengers, everyone, it's just it kind of put a spotlight on comic, kind of matured the genre a little bit, and then the Image thing in the '90s kind of changed the whole
Well,
industry.
okay, and let me just I know you know this, and I'm
Yeah.
just gonna point out Stan co-created the
Yes.
characters.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Stan,
Yeah.
that's okay, but that's I love Stan, and without Stan Lee, there's no Marvel Comics. But I believe also without Jack Kirby and without Steve Ditko,
Oh,
there's
of
no Marvel
course.
Comics.
Yes.
So, in some ways, even without Martin Goodman, who was the owner, who was Stan's cousin, I think they were all, you know, they were all irreplaceable elements. And Stan, with Stan being, in many ways, kind of the organizer and the catalyst. I think he was. It's so hard to apportion, exact percentages. But I think Stan, um, as much as any of the characters, he created the idea that being a Marvel reader um, made you special.
Mm-hmm.
That just by picking up that comic, he was able to. Um, he was an adult who spoke to kids, but didn't talk down to them and didn't lecture them,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't pretend that he was a kid. He just somehow had this gift for, in the comics, of course, where he was brilliant, but also in the letters page answers and the bullpen bulletins. I'm from that first generation of Marvel readers in the '60s, and I was reading other comics and enjoying them well enough, but there was something that Stan understood about um, what would make somebody just feel like they were in on something so exciting that they couldn't miss a single issue of any of the Marvel comics. And, so of course the comics had to be great, but they didn't always have to be great. What we remember, what's come down, of course, is the Galactus trilogy and This
Oh yeah.
Man, This Monster, and the Master Planner saga, and all those kind of stories that are so iconic. They have names above and beyond just the title of the comic book.
Yes.
There were a lot of crappy Marvel stories that came out over the years, but because Stan was so good at promoting, he could make you forgive the stories that weren't so great, and even the ones, and they all had something cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but they were, just I don't want to. If you go back and look at the various, you know, um, continuous runs of the comics that weren't necessarily Fantastic Four or Amazing Spider-Man, but Stan was your pal. He made you love being part of Marvel, and really it's like, okay, so this isn't the greatest story ever, but it's still pretty good, and it's still part of that world. So it was, he was very good at making you feel special just by being a reader.
Yeah, I just remember my first exposure to Stan Lee was also kind of like my gateway into comic collecting was watching Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends on Saturday mornings. And he did the
I bet.
voiceovers and everything, and I
Right.
was just like, it just, yeah. I mean, whether it was just the businessman in him, but I mean, he just seemed to love. Anytime you saw him talking, however, talking about these characters, he just seemed to love it.
Well, in comics, there's really not much of a barrier between the business and the creative. I mean, it's you're you're writing and drawing these stories with the intent of people buying them, and the more
Mhm.
people buying them, the better. And so and that goes with the TV shows too. So that's I mean, even if it wasn't a matter of sales and money, just anybody who creates something usually wants
Oh yeah.
as many other people as possible to see it. But Stan was a performer. I think his probably if he had you know the ability to go back in time and make a choice, he might have um, become an actor. He had done a lot of acting in school and in his neighborhood. So he loved acting. He loved being in front of people. So that was, oddly enough, what he seemed to, I think it's true of a lot of writers, is that he, I think, enjoyed having written, but I think the actual, and he even liked writing, but he didn't like the solitary nature of writing. He was very much a people person.
Hmm.
So I think he wrote as quickly as he could, and then sort of wanted to get back out and interacting either with friends and family or with fans at conventions. He very much or just even with coworkers at the office. He just liked interacting with creative, interesting people.
I mean, just the amount of work he did, back in the day with his artists. I mean, but he was writing many books. I mean, you were a writer and editor. Can you? I mean, do you ever just look at like how did he accomplish all he did back in the '60s?
It's pretty incredible because I think he was someone who had the ability to get things right in first draft. Not that he didn't do rewrites, but I
Yeah.
think he wrote quickly, and I think he was able to edit and supervise quickly.
Mm.
He liked to work with people, whether they were artists, collaborators, or whether they were other staff members. He liked to work with people whose instincts he overall trusted. And so then he would give them a lot of autonomy, which again is the source of a lot of the conflicts he had to deal with
Hmm.
later on. But he was he was not afraid to delegate. He wasn't. He could be a control freak. I think in the sense that he might end up doing a lot of revisions or rewrites on a story once it was finished, and then before it went to the printers, which just because he did want to get it perfect.
Hmm.
I don't think that interrupted the workflow. I think he just had this understanding that the comics were always a volume business, especially in the days before Marvel. Um, in the 40s and 50s, Marvel Stan and his staff of other editors were supervising 75 or 80 titles a month. So I think he realized that you can't get hung up on on little details for more than a minute or two because there'd be another 100 decisions to make
Hmm.
5 minutes later. So
Um,
he seemed to have a gift for that, for understanding how to, and he didn't like anything hanging over his head. So if someone left him emailed him or had just something they needed feedback on, he's not somebody who would wait weeks. He would like turn it around right away.
and I understand that. But just talking, I mean, just the amount of books and the volume in that. I mean, in your personal opinion, do you think is continuity in like a universe like the Marvel universe good for comics, or does it cause more headaches than?
Um, I think it's overall good. I
Mhm.
think it's tricky though because of course when you do have a comics universe like the Marvel one that's lasted either 60 years or if you go back to the 30s, 80 years, um, I think you have to use continuity when it's useful.
Mhm.
If you have a really great idea for a new story, but it's contradicted by a story that came out 40 years ago, there was a backup in a low selling title that maybe you don't have to take that particular story into consideration. I think and maybe three people will write in and say you forgot about that story from 1968 or something. Yeah, I think it's terrific that and it's ingenious really that those the Marvel characters and I guess the DC characters too, although they've had their universe has been less continuous. It's been
Yeah.
interrupted a few times. Yeah, you can use it. You don't have to be a slave to it, but if there's something, yeah, that these characters have relationships and know each other and have attitudes and feelings yeah, and I think readers like that. I mean, there's not every reader, but I think a lot more. I mean, look at the Marvel movies now. People, keep
Hmm.
going to them. More go to them, with each one. And I'm guessing that um, that most of the viewers, I mean, maybe maybe 20% really remember every single detail of every single movie. But
Hmm.
I think most people going to the movies are like most people, reading comics, which is they sort of kind of know who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who loves each other, who hates each other, what the stakes are in a particular story. And it gives the stories resonance. I think there used to be a big fear in comics that we alienate readers with the stories, that it, you know
Hello. Hello.
people want it. But I think there's a significant part of the audience that if they come in and it's issue 428, they don't go, oh no, I'm not going to bother because there's 428 issues. They're going to go, wow, that's really exciting. There's 428 issues. I think for a lot of people that I mean, clearly they demonstrate with their box office and video and DVD and download purchases that people like that kind of complicated universe. You have to give them a fighting chance.
Hmm.
I think you have to, I mean, that was sort of one of the main skills that Marvel writers were taught to sort of to be able, if you're not going to do an actual, you know, here's what happened last issue, then at least give the reader a fighting chance at knowing what's going to be important in this particular issue they're reading, or even I think it even happens with the trade paperbacks. Give people a chance to know what's at stake, so that they can go into this and read it. I mean that it's hard to do, and I see it done not that well at times, but ideally that's what you want to do is say, you don't have to know every single thing. Here's the basics, and the rest you'll pick up as you go along.
Well, wasn't that Stan's mantra? Because there was always a quick summary at the beginning of all the books back in the day because Stan always said, every comic could be someone's first.
Right. Yeah, and it was tricky, especially back in the '60s. Um, Distribution of comic books was spotty.
Hmm.
So if you bought one issue of Iron Man, you didn't, before the comic shops, when the comics were on sale on the newsstands, you didn't necessarily know if you were ever going to see part two or part three because it just might not be in the bundle that the distributor sent to your local retailer that week.
Hmm.
So it was taking a big chance to do continued stories. But I guess Stan thought it was worth the risk and did it. But that would, I think that was fairly common where people would just get parts of a story, and yet obviously that did not stop people from buying them. If anything, once the comic shops did come around, it gave people, a reason to go hunting the back issue bins or the convention, to go hunting them. And again, but again, as you were saying, right, he did write them so that if all you were seeing was that one issue, if you were reading part three of a 5-part story, he gave you enough information to be able to enjoy that part three and not feel confused.
Hmm. That's the other thing I wanted to ask you about. You were talking about the high issue counts. Like it seems like now, like Marvel and DC, they kind of like reboot the numbering every so often, and I'm just like, I don't. Do you think it's a big advantage? Because I know back when I started collecting, like if something was 300 something, or I was willing to jump on, Amazing Spider-Man at 310, or and then there was all. I'm doesn't matter low count, high count. I mean, I was picking up Danny Fingeroth what if issues. I was like I said, I was picking up Fantastic Four and Amazing Spider-Man at 300 some issues.
Well, you're yeah. I don't know the answer. I mean, I guess the somehow the retailers and publishers do seem to feel there's an advantage to number, to short and to limited series, um, or rebooting things, um, or having alternate covers. Um, I think it's at a funny period. I mean, these characters are more popular than ever in the movies and on TV and in video games. Uh, Comics don't sell the numbers they used to, although I think they're healthier than people think. But that may not benefit retailers necessarily if they're popular in trade paperbacks that are sold in bookstores or on digital versions. So I guess there's still a segment of the collecting public that would prefer a number one to a number 522.
Mm.
Even um, I've that retail end has never been my specialty, and I don't know. I mean, do retailers like it, or do they complain about it, and do it and buy them anyway? I mean, I think it's probably a little bit of that. I think you're right. If it was just people buying them for the content,
Mm.
then it wouldn't matter what issue number it was. But if a lot of your readers, if a lot of your consumer base is buying them to have a number one issue that they can slab and maybe make themselves believe they can sell it for a lot of money in 10 years, then maybe having a number one is potentially good. This is that's something I've never really understood, so I'm just kind of feeling around for an answer here. But you probably know better than I do. What do you think?
I just think it's well, again, I'm an old collector, but I find it confusing, especially when you're trying to talk to people to like pick up a book for the first time. It's like, oh, did you pick up? Oh, I got number one. Well, it's like, which one is it? Is it the one from last year? Is it the one from 5 years ago? Is it the original one?
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah. I'll go on. Yeah.
oh no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, I just think sometimes I don't know if that even is even more intimidating to new readers than a higher count.
Well, look, I guess what what I don't think anybody has figured out in a significant way yet is how do you take the popularity of the movies and TV shows
Mm.
and get those people to at least try a comic, you know. Um,
Well,
I mean maybe in some maybe the impossible answer is that you need to, get people to dress up like the actors in the movies and pose like they were, do really Fomedis. I don't know how, but it does seem that would be some resource that would be great if the companies could tap into. Like, how do you, or I mean, or maybe kids, maybe people going to these movies just aren't interested in those characters beyond the movies, which is fine for the owners of the companies because
mhm.
that money all goes to the same pot. Um, we've been trying to figure that out since I don't know, probably since the Superman radio show, in 1941. Like how do you take this much larger audience that experiences the characters in a non-print medium and bring even a small percentage of them back around to buy the comics? That's been the holy grail for comics forever.
I just don't understand why they don't have like a quick ad or something in front of all these Marvel movies for like, or even the DC ones, just like, hey, just, stop by your local comic shop or whatever, you can read the further adventures of whatever character this movie's about. Because I
Yeah,
mean, I think it's the distribution. I think that's really changed. I mean, you really have to go into a comic shop, or you have to go searching, to download it digitally.
Right.
Because yeah, back in the day, you could just like you said, the newsstand, or I mean, there was even spinner racks in grocery stores or convenience stores.
Well, look, you could take that further. Why don't they have a rack of comic books after the Avengers movie? Why aren't
Mm,
there a rack of Avengers comics and Iron Man comics and Captain America comics on in the movie theater? you know? Well, I mean, make a deal with with the local comic shop. Let them have, I don't know, just these just, I'm sure there are complicated reasons. Maybe even the movie theater owners don't want it to cut into their popcorn sales. I don't know what, but it just, you would just think, give people a chance. You know, have uh, have an Avengers comic available after the Avengers movie.
yes.
But
uh
I do not know. I do not know the answers to these things.
Makes me
But
sad.
I think it's something Stan wrestled with. I think
Hmm.
he, to bring it back to my book, A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee,
Yes.
available at bookstores and online now. And I'm actually in the middle of recording the audiobook, by the way, so
Oh.
that'll be out in January. Um, from St. Martin's Press, Macmillan, as is the print book. I think this was sort of Stan's struggle, as it's every publisher's struggle. How do you get people interested in them? How do you keep them coming back? How do you change things, without making them unrecognizable? But if you don't do any changes at all, people stop buying them too. It's sort of these are, um, and then how do you, um, what kind of control can you exert over the movie and TV versions? Which Marvel now finally has everybody sort of on the same bus, but there were years and years when Marvel would just sell the rights off to these things and have virtually no control. Um, Certainly none by contract. Stan might go out there and kind of try to, persuade movie studios that they should be more like the comics. But it was only the last maybe 20 years or so that movie studios finally realized, oh, maybe what Stan and Jack and Steve and Larry and Johnny were doing in the comics uh, is something that it worked, and we should try something similar in the movies. But it was a very long, hard road because it took there were a couple or three generations of studio executives in Hollywood that couldn't take superhero seriously. They just felt they'd never get an audience that was more than 12 years old if they took them seriously. And finally, maybe with Blade in 1998, and then with the X-Men and Spider-Man movies, and then certainly with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they realized, oh, look at that. If you give people good stories with relatable characters, it can work. It doesn't have to be pow bam zap like the old Batman TV show.
Yes. I think they've learned their lesson now with billion-dollar movies. Yes.
I think so. I mean, we'll see if and when if and when the superhero craze dies down, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to that.
All right, I will let you go in a little bit, but before I let you go, since we're promoting the book and you knew Stanley personally, is there anything you could tell us about Stanley that maybe the rest of us didn't know?
Well, I think most people, if they know history of comics at all, they think Marvel sort of appeared out of nowhere in the early '60s, and then and then came up with all these iconic characters that are more popular than ever. I think with people, maybe it's a good life lesson too, to not give up, because
Hmm.
Stan was in the comics business, writing and editing and art directing for 20 years before FF number one. And Marvel had its share of successes, but Stan was known in the business, but not known to the general public,
Hmm.
and certainly the characters were never as well known as they are now. But they had kind of an implosion and some hard times, and almost went out of business in the late '50s and they sort of turned it around. So I think that's the interesting thing, that Stan um, was the overnight sensation that took 20 years. For him to learn his skills and become as proficient as he was in order to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the um, implosion that happened at Marvel in the late 50s. So sort of I think it's an interesting and important lesson for people to learn about Stan in particular, and sort of as a role model for uh, for people in general.
Okay, yeah, because isn't that the story that was he thinking at one point of getting out of comics to write the great American novel, and
He was
then
always thinking of getting out of
yeah.
comics. Being in comics was like being in pornography. Being in comics was like being in the mob. It was, no, it wasn't anything that people in your family would like would brag about.
Hmm.
It's hard to for people now to understand that, because these characters are so beloved. And but comics was for most people a stepping stone to what to a serious job, or to a real to job in advertising or illustration or in Hollywood. And I think Stan, had those desires too. So he was always, I think he was proud of what he did and enjoyed what he did. But a lot of times for him, it was, especially in the 40s and 50s, it was a means to make a living and support his family, and have a nice lifestyle. I think it was, I think it was only when Marvel started hitting it big that he thought that it might actually be a career for a grown up. And even then, as a child of the Depression and from a poor family, he never stopped having side gigs and backup plans. He was a very complicated guy, um, who had to deal with a lot of different um, challenging relationships with colleagues and people in Hollywood. It took him, a lot of the time banging his head against the wall to get Marvel taken seriously. And again, it's hard for people who've only, known about the movies and TV shows in the past 20 years to appreciate that. But he really, um, he simultaneously was Marvel's cheerleader and standard bearer, but he also knew or felt that it could all go away anytime. So he was always looking for an escape hatch. It was a
Hmm.
very, like I said, he was, uh, everybody would like to, we'd love to think that, people are what we see on TV, and that the guy you see in the cameos, well, of course, he spent his whole life, embodying Marvel. But no, but the fact is, Marvel was always owned by one corporation or another, and corporations are notoriously not sentimental. And so Stan always had to deal with some very harsh realities, even while putting on a smiling face. So I mean, I think the lesson is, life is complicated. Deal with it.
And that you're not going to be the superstar from day one. It takes the hard work, the dedication, the time.
Right. And then there's always somebody trying to knock you out from being a superstar too.
Oh yeah, if you're the best, there's always someone gunning for you. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the book is 400 pages long, and it's not just because I'm like a verbose windbag, but it's because Stan had a very interesting, complicated life that I think people will enjoy reading about.
I mean, a very long life, and it filled with all this greatness.
Yeah, no, really, a fascinating. He was as fascinating as any of the Marvel characters.
He was the original Marvel character.
I think so.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me. Again, promote the book. Anything else you want to
Book is
promote?
called A Marvelous Life: uh, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. It's from St. Martin's Press at Macmillan, available bookstores, comic shops, online at the usual outlets. There's a digital version that you can download, that you can buy for us, and there's an audiobook that I'm reading coming out early next year. And coming up on December 14th, I will be at the Big Apple Christmas Convention in New York at the New Yorker Hotel on West 34th Street. And I'm sure I will be doing many more events and other things to promote the book. So be on the lookout. And I think that's all I can think of to promote right at this moment.
All right. Well, again, you're a friend of the show now. So when that audiobook comes out, any of your appearances, if you just drop me a line, I will help you promote on our social media. So
Thank you so much. This was great fun.
Oh,
I'm glad I got to be on the show.
the pleasure was all mine. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.